He quiet air my name is Avery Crane, and I was 34 the week my whole family decided I had stolen from them. My grandparents died on a Tuesday in a small plane that never reached the wedding they were flying to. I found out from my brother Trevor, who asked about the will before he asked if I was okay. 6 days later, their lawyer read it aloud, and every head in that room turned and looked at me like I was a thief. I thought the funeral was the hardest part. Then they came to the house with a moving truck and a man I had never seen, and I understood the funeral had only been the beginning. What I had quietly done 2 days before that truck arrived is the only reason I can tell you this calmly now. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet impossible families and learn that the quietest person in the room is rarely the weakest. If a story about boundaries, dignity, and standing your ground speaks to you, you are in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. It was a little after 7 when the phone rang, and the wind-up clock in my hallway was still ticking its slow, patient tick. I almost let it go to voicemail. Trevor never called me. We texted twice a year on birthdays the way you wave at a neighbor you don't like, so I answered and his voice came out wrong, flat and quick. "It's Grandma and Grandpa," he said. "Their plane went down outside Asheville." I sat down on the floor. I remember the cold of the boards through my jeans and the clock counting off seconds I couldn't feel. They had been flying to a friend's wedding, a couple they had known for 50 years. I asked if anyone had survived. He said no. Then, before I could breathe, before either of us had said a single soft word about the two people who had raised half of my childhood, my brother asked the question that told me everything. "Hey," he said, "do you know if they left a will?" I didn't answer. I just listened to him breathe and to the clock ticking and to the strange hollow space where grief was supposed to go. He filled it for me. He said the family would figure out the estate together. He said it the way you say something you've already practiced. I told him I had to go. I hung up and sat on that floor for a long time. The only sound in my house was that old clock, the one Grandpa had taught me to wind when I was 9. I didn't cry yet. I was already wondering what my family had been planning while my grandparents were still alive. The will was read on a gray Monday in the law office of Walter Howard, 6 days after the crash. Walter was 71, slow-moving, with a handshake like a vice and eyes that didn't miss much. He had served with my grandfather a lifetime ago in a war neither of them talked about. The whole family came in black. My father, Gerald, sat in front with his arms crossed. My mother, Brenda, dabbed at eyes that stayed dry. Trevor jittered his leg. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, sat one row back with a legal pad already open, as if she had come to take inventory rather than mourn. I took the chair at the end, the way I always did at family gatherings. Close to the door, Walter cleared his throat and put on his glasses. He thanked us for coming. He said Raymond and Joan Crane had been deliberate people and that their wishes were clear. Then he started reading and the room held its breath. I expected the house to go to my father. I expected the savings to be split. I expected to be mentioned somewhere near the bottom, a keepsake, maybe the clock if I was lucky. Carol was a paralegal, which in my family made her something close to a general. She didn't bother with warmth. "We wanted to give you a courtesy heads up," she said, in the tone of a woman who had never given a courtesy in her life. "The family is prepared to challenge the will." I asked on what grounds. "Undue influence," she said. "Two vulnerable elderly people, one estranged granddaughter who swooped in at the end and walked away with everything. A jury sees that story very clearly." I almost laughed. I hadn't swooped in, I had been kept out, but I knew even then that the truth and what a contest could cost were two different things. A challenge could drag on for a year. It could bleed the estate dry in legal fees. It could turn my grandparents' careful wishes into a slow war. Carol was counting on that. She was counting on me being scared of the process. What she didn't count on was that I had spent my whole career inside processes, and they didn't frighten me the way they frightened other people. Then she made her mistake. She got impatient, and impatient people leak. "Look," she said, lowering her voice, "your mother needs this settled before the bank moves on her, so let's all be reasonable." She caught herself half a second too late. "Before the bank moves on her." I wrote it down. I thanked Carol for the courtesy heads up in a voice as flat as hers. I hung up and sat with that one sentence for a long while. My mother wasn't just greedy. My mother was drowning. And drowning people don't let go, they pull you under with them. I called Walter the next morning. I didn't call him crying. I called him the way I would call a supplier with a list. He answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting. The undue influence threat, Carol's slip about the bank, the Sunday meeting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Let me set your mind at ease," he said. He walked me through it slowly. The will was as solid as a will gets, two disinterested witnesses, a video of the signing, a physician's letter dated the same day, confirming my grandparents understood exactly what they were doing. An undue influence claim had to be proven, he said, and the burden fell on them, not me. They had nothing but their feelings. I asked what they could really do. "They can file," he said. "They can make noise. They can spend their own money making noise." Then he paused. "There's something else you should know. Your grandfather added a clause, a no contest provision." I asked what that meant in plain words. It means, Walter said, that anyone who challenges this will and loses forfeits whatever your grandparents did leave them. I sat up. They left them something. A token, he said. 20,000 each to your father, your mother, and your brother. Raymond insisted on it. He said it was a test. I wrote down every word, a test. My grandfather, dead in a field outside Asheville, had reached forward in time and laid a small, quiet trap, baited with exactly the kind of money my family could not leave alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something stranger. I felt understood. He had known them. He had known me. And he had trusted me to be patient enough to let it work. Before we hung up, I asked Walter the question I had been circling. Why me? Why not split it? Why hand one grandchild a fortune and light a fire under the whole family? He was quiet again, the way he got when he was deciding how much to say. Your grandparents talked about you a great deal, he said finally, more than you'd guess. He told me they had noticed things, the graduation no one attended, the one Joan only heard about afterward and cried over. The phone calls where Gerald spoke about me like a problem he was tired of. The Thanksgiving I came home on leave and my father called me a house guest, and I smiled and helped with the dishes anyway. They wrote it down, Walter said. Not to use against anyone, Joan kept a journal. Raymond kept letters. They wanted a record of what they'd seen in case anyone ever claimed they hadn't seen it. I had not known any of that. Trevor with a kind of nervous greed. My mother with that wet, weaponized warmth. They expected me to fold. The old Avery would have the house guest, the spare. I felt the pull of it even then. The deep family training that says peace is always worth more than your own ground. I sat with it for a moment, then I said the only true thing I had. I need to read a letter first. The room went absolutely still. My mother's smile faltered. What letter? I stood and buttoned my coat the way my father had. I left them sitting at their pretend negotiation with their pretend plan and the air going cold. The campaign started Monday. It came in soft, the way these things do before they come in hard. My phone lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. An aunt I barely knew sent a paragraph about how grandma would have wanted the family whole. A cousin sent old photos of me as a child at the lake, captioned with crying faces as if nostalgia were a lever. My mother sent a Bible verse about generosity. Trevor sent a sonogram with a one-line caption, think about him. None of them asked how I was. All of them assumed I was the problem to be solved. I recognized the pattern because I had worked alongside people who applied pressure for a living, so I did what I always did when something felt off. I made a file, I screenshotted every message, dated it, dropped it in a folder, and did not respond to any of them. I was not building a case yet. I want to be honest about that. I was not some chess master 10 moves ahead. I was a grieving woman who had learned the hard way that you don't win by reacting to people who want you reacting. You win by keeping your hands still and your records clean. I made coffee. I wound the clock. I carried more of my life out to the lake house, one trip at a time. And every evening I sat on the dock and listened to the water against the pilings and let myself feel exactly two things at once. The loss of two people who had loved me, and the slow, cold certainty that the people who shared my blood were not going to stop until someone made them. I just didn't yet know how loud they were willing to get. Carol called me on Thursday. Smell of it undo me. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and old coffee. The wind-up clock in the hall, Grandpa's clock, twin to the one he had given me, ticked on, faithful like it hadn't heard the news. I wound it the way he taught me. Then I walked the rooms and let myself cry. Finally, the way I hadn't been able to in front of anyone. And somewhere between his workbench and her kitchen, I made a decision. I was not going to let this house become something they fought over from a distance. I was going to live in it. I would give up the apartment and move out here and be present, because presence is 9/10 of keeping anything. I started carrying boxes in from my car that very night. I was halfway through the third trip when I saw the slip of paper on the kitchen counter, folded once, in my mother's handwriting, slid under the door at some point while I was out. Short and flat the way my family liked their cruelty, small enough to deny later. Family meeting Sunday, be there, not a question, not a condolence. An order left in the house of the dead in a home that was now legally mine. I set down the box I was holding and stood very still. I went to the Sunday meeting because avoiding it would only delay it, and because I wanted to see the shape of what they intended. It was held at my parents' house in the formal dining room they used twice a year. They had set it up like a negotiation, my father at the head, my mother to his right, Trevor across from an empty chair far down the table. Carol sat in the corner with her legal pad. They had clearly talked. My mother did the speaking. She laid it out gently, reasonably, the way you explain something to a slow child. The money would be managed by the family. A portion would clear the loan she and my father had taken for her real estate venture, the one no one mentioned at holidays. A portion would help Trevor and his pregnant wife with their new house. The lake house, she said, would naturally come to Trevor in time for the children. The rest would be set aside. She used that phrase like it meant something. Then she leaned forward and reached for the soft voice again. Sign it over, Avery. Do the decent thing. There it was. The whole table looked at me, my father with cold certainty. She softened, she put her hand on my arm and looked up at me with wet, careful eyes. We're all grieving, sweetheart. We'll talk soon when everyone's calmer. Her voice was gentle, her grip was not. I had spent 4 years in the army learning to read what people meant under what they said. And what my mother meant was simple. She had not given up. She had only changed weapons. I got in my car. I sat there a moment, watching the three of them confer in the rearview mirror, heads close, my father gesturing toward the law office. Then I drove out to the lake, to the house that was somehow mine now, and tried to remember how to breathe. I should tell you who I am because it matters for what comes next. I spent 12 years in the army, most of it in logistics. People hear that and picture clipboards, and they're not wrong. But a clipboard in the wrong desert is the difference between men eating and men not eating. My job was to make sure the right things reach the right people at the right time, and to write everything down, because in that work, memory is the first thing that betrays you. You document, you date it, you keep the file. After I got out, I didn't go home. I took a small apartment 20 minutes from the lake and a job coordinating supply for a farmers cooperative, and I kept to myself. I told people I valued my privacy. The truth was quieter and worse. I had grown up the spare child, the one whose graduation no one drove to see, the one my father once introduced to a neighbor as our house guest and laughed like it was a joke. You learn after enough of that to stop reaching for people who keep their hands behind their backs. So I built a life that didn't require them. The only place I had ever felt fully seen was the lake house, with two old people who asked me about my day and actually waited for the answer. Grandpa would hand me a wrench. Grandma would hand me a warm slice of that terrible bread. They never once made me prove I belonged. I told myself after the funeral that I had left that family behind years ago and felt nothing. The will had just proved I never really had. You cannot leave behind people who are still living rent-free in the part of you that flinches. I knew that the moment my mother's hand tightened on my arm, they were not done with me. And I was not as far away as I had pretended. The lake house was a low cedar place that my grandfather had built up over 40 years, room by room, the way some men build a life. I drove out the day after the reading to begin sorting their things, because someone had to, and because I couldn't stand the idea of strangers doing it. The water was doing its evening thing when I arrived, lapping against the dock pilings in that slow, patient rhythm I had fallen asleep to as a child. My grandmother's lavender was still blooming along the porch rail, gone a little wild without her. I stood there a long time and let th. Instead, Walter read my name. He read it again a paragraph later. He kept reading it. I felt the air change before I understood the words. My mother's pen stopped scratching. My father uncrossed his arms. Trevor's leg went still. Walter looked at me over his glasses, not unkindly, and then looked back down at the page, like a man who knew exactly what he was about to set loose in that room. My mother laughed. One short, sharp note with no humor in it at all. There must be a mistake, she said. Walter did not look up. There is no mistake. He set the page down and folded his hands. Avery is the sole heir. The estate passes entirely to her. He let it sit, $40 million, the house on the lake, the land, the accounts I had never known existed. He said the numbers plainly, the way you read coordinates, and the room came apart in slow motion around me. My father said my name like a curse. My mother said soul 3 times as if the word itself were broken. I didn't say anything. I was thinking about the summers, about the dock I had repaired by hand at 14 while everyone else was at the club, about my grandmother teaching me to bake bread that never rose right, and how she laughed every single time. Walter kept going. He explained that the will had been signed 2 years earlier in his office, witnessed by 2 people, recorded on video. He said there was a physician's letter confirming my grandparents were of sound mind on the day they signed. He said it twice, slowly, and I realized he wasn't telling me. He was telling the room. He was building a wall in front of me brick by brick while everyone watched. Then he looked at me directly. There is also a letter handwritten for you alone. Your grandmother asked that you read it when you were ready and not before. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. Behind me, I could hear my mother and Carol whispering fast and low, the way you whisper when you are already drawing up a plan. My father stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out without looking at me. The door clicked shut. The clock on Walter's wall ticked, and I understood that the grief I had been waiting to feel was going to have to get in line. They were waiting for me in the parking lot. My father stood by his truck with his jaw set and the gray sky pressed down on all of us. I tried to walk to my car. He stepped in front of me. It should have gone to family, he said. I had been hearing the rough edges of that sentence my whole life, but never the whole thing, never out loud. I looked at him. I am family, I said. My father's face did something complicated and then closed like a door. He turned away. That was always his answer to anything true, the turning away. Trevor came up beside him, hands in his pockets, that loose, entitled slouch he'd carried since he was a teenager. You don't even live here, Avery. You haven't lived here in 12 years. As if a house were a reward for staying close enough to want it. And in his mind, maybe it already was his. For as long as I could remember, the family had spoken of the lake house as Trevor's someday, the place he would raise his kids, an inheritance everyone had agreed on without once asking the two people who actually owned it. I didn't answer him either. There was nothing to say that they were ready to hear. My mother appeared last, and she did the most frightening thing of all. I had spent years believing my grandparents simply had a soft spot for me, the way you have a soft spot for a stray. But they had been watching the whole time, and they had understood the shape of my family better than I had let myself understand it. There's the letter, too, Walter reminded me gently. Joan's letter, you haven't read it yet, have you? I admitted I hadn't. I told him the truth, that I was afraid of it. Some part of me wasn't ready to be loved on paper by two people who could no longer be hugged. Walter let that sit. Read it when you can, he said. She wrote it for the woman you are, not the girl they tried to make you. Then he wished me a good night, and the line went quiet, and the clock in the hall ticked on. They came to the lake on a Saturday, uninvited, while I was out at the cooperative. I came back to find my father's truck in the drive and the two of them, Gerald and Trevor, walking the property like assessors. They had a tape measure. They had phones out, taking pictures of the dock, the boathouse, the view. They had walked straight through my grandmother's lavender to get a better angle, crushing a whole section of it into the dirt. The broken smell of it hung in the air like something grieving. I parked and got out slowly. My father didn't even have the grace to look caught. Just getting a sense of the place, he said. For valuation, I asked who had let them in. It's the family home, Avery, and there it was again. That word family used like a key that opened any door but mine. Trevor wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept measuring. My father walked up onto the porch, my grandfather's porch, and stood there like he was already deciding what to tear down. It should have gone to family, he said, quieter now, almost to himself. Like a prayer he had worn smooth. I told them both evenly that they needed to leave. My father studied me for a moment, surprised maybe that the house guest had a voice. Then he shrugged and walked to his truck. Trevor lingered. You don't even live here, he muttered. Then, glancing at the boxes of my things stacked in the front window, he flushed because he could see that I did now. They drove off. I went inside, shaking a little, and on the kitchen counter where my mother's note had been, my father had left something new. A real estate agent's business card, propped against the salt shaker like a flag planted on land they had already decided was theirs. That night I finally read the letter. It had been waiting in my grandmother's old Bible, the leather one she kept on the nightstand, folded once and pressed flat between the thin pages of the Psalms, exactly where Walter said she had tucked it. Her handwriting had gone shaky in her last years, but it was unmistakably hers, the same loops that had signed my birthday cards for 34 years. I sat on the edge of her bed and read it by the lamp, with the lavender smell drifting in through the open window and the clock ticking down the hall. She didn't waste words. She told me she loved me, and then she told me why she trusted me, and the why was a list of small things I had forgotten I'd done. You fixed the dock the summer you were 14, she wrote. By yourself in 2 days, and you never once told anyone or asked for thanks.